My name is Harper, and I was standing in a funeral chapel watching my entire world end. I was 50 years old, an architect, a wife of 26 years, and as of 3 days prior a mother who had lost her only child. The white lilies surrounding Daniel's coffin blurred through my tears, their scent cloying and suffocating. The polished oak reflected the soft lighting, and I could not reconcile that my beautiful 23-year-old son was inside it. He had been driving home from university, excited about a teaching placement he had just secured. A lorry had skidded on wet road. The police said it was instantaneous, as if that made it bearable. 3 days since the accident. 3 days of phone calls, arrangements, and paperwork that felt obscene in its mundane necessity. 3 days of moving through a fog so thick I could barely breathe, barely think, and barely exist. The chapel was full. Daniel's university friends sat red-eyed and devastated in the rows behind me. My colleagues from the architectural firm I co-founded were there, their faces etched with sympathy I couldn't absorb. My mother Margaret sat rigid beside me, her hand gripping mine with fierce protective strength. At 72 she was still formidable, a retired solicitor with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. But one person was conspicuously and devastatingly absent. Richard. My husband. I had rung him twice the day before. Voicemail both times. That morning nothing. I told myself there must be an explanation, some reasonable cause for his silence. Perhaps he couldn't face it, couldn't bear to see our son this way. I made excuses for him even as my chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to rage. The vicar began speaking about loss and faith and God's mysterious ways. His words washed over me, meaningless platitudes that couldn't touch the howling emptiness inside me. Daniel was gone. My boy who used to ring me every Sunday just to chat about his week, who wanted to be a teacher because he loved helping people learn, who had hugged me a month ago and said "You're the strongest person I know, Mum." All of it gone in an instant of twisted metal and shattered glass. I couldn't breathe. The chapel walls pressed in and the lilies' scent overwhelmed everything. I needed air, space, and something other than this suffocating grief. I stood abruptly, murmuring apologies to no one in particular, and stumbled outside into the grey London afternoon. November rain threatened with clouds low and heavy, matching the weight crushing my chest. My hands shook as I pulled out my mobile. I needed Richard. Whatever our problems and whatever distance had grown between us over the years, surely he would be here for this. For Daniel. For me. I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. Background noise assaulted my ears immediately. Laughter and music and the unmistakable sounds of a busy bar or restaurant. Sunshine and leisure whilst I stood outside our son's funeral in the rain. Richard, where are you? Daniel's funeral is happening right now. A pause. Then that sigh, that familiar sound of irritation I had heard too many times over the years. Oh, for God's sake. I told you I had this trip planned. And then the words that would change everything. The words I would hear in my nightmares for months to come. That useless boy was always a burden in our lives. Good riddance, he's gone. He's your son, Harper. Not my problem. I'm on holiday in Marbella with Claire and I'd appreciate it if you didn't disturb me again. The line went dead. I stood there with my mobile still pressed to my ear as rain began to fall in light drops that quickly grew heavier. The words echoed in my skull, impossible to process. Useless. Burden. Good riddance. My son, my Daniel who had been kind and funny and brilliant, reduced to a problem solved by death. Harper. My mother's voice cut through the rain and shock. Margaret appeared beside me with her coat already darkening with water and her face creased with worry. She took one look at me and knew. Darling, what's happened? He said Daniel was useless. A burden. Good riddance, he's gone. The words came out flat and disconnected, as if someone else were speaking. He's in Marbella. With Claire. My mother's expression transformed into something I had rarely seen even in her 40 years practicing law. This was a grandmother's rage and a mother's protective fury combined into something formidable. That ends today, she said quietly, her voice trembling with controlled anger. She wrapped her arm around my shoulders, solid and steady whilst I shattered, and guided me back inside the chapel. Back to my seat beside Daniel's coffin. The vicar was still speaking and offering comfort I couldn't hear. I stared at the flowers and at the order of service with Daniel's smiling photograph on the front. And beneath the grief, beneath the shock and disbelief, I felt something new kindle inside me. Something cold and clarifying that cut through the numbness like a blade. Anger. Richard had abandoned me at our son's funeral. Had called Daniel useless. Had chosen a holiday and a mistress over his own child's burial. My mother's hand squeezed mine and I squeezed back, holding on to that spark of fury like a lifeline. The grief would crush me later, I knew. But right then in that moment the anger was the only thing keeping me from dissolving entirely into the darkness threatening to swallow me whole. 2 days after the funeral I sat in my mother's sitting room in Hampstead, unable to return to the home I had shared with Richard for over 2 decades. The house in Islington felt contaminated now, every room holding memories that had curdled into something bitter. Margaret had made tea that neither of us drank, the cups cooling on the coffee table between us whilst rain streaked down the windows. Daniel's photographs surrounded us. His graduation from university, cap askew, and that brilliant smile lighting up his face. His first day at primary school, gap-toothed and clutching a rucksack nearly as big as he was. Him laughing at a family dinner that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life entirely. I had barely spoken since the funeral. Words felt impossible, as if my throat had forgotten how to form them. I moved through shock like walking through water, every movement requiring conscious effort. Sleep came in brief snatches interrupted by dreams where Daniel was still alive, where I would wake reaching for my mobile to ring him before reality crashed down again. Margaret had been watching me with that careful expression mothers reserve for daughters on the edge of breaking. Finally she placed a folder on the coffee table, the sound of it against would making me flinch. "Darling, I need you to focus for just a moment," she said gently. "I've been through the company documents. You and Richard own the architectural firm 50-50, but there's something you need to see." I stared at the folder as if it might bite. I didn't want to think about the firm or Richard or anything beyond the crushing weight of Daniel's absence. But Margaret opened it with methodical precision and began laying out documents. Bank statements. Company records. Patent applications. Contract awards. "The South Bank development project that made your reputation," Margaret said, tapping a design proposal with my signature across the bottom. "Your work. The sustainable housing complex in Camden that won the REBA award. Yours. The renovation of the Victorian terrace in Notting Hill that was featured in Architectural Digest. Also yours." I looked at the documents, at my own handwriting and signature repeated across patent after patent. My designs. My late nights perfecting blueprints whilst Richard played golf with clients. My vision that had built the firm's reputation. "Richard has been coasting on your talent for years," Margaret continued, her solicitor's voice calm but edged with steel. "Playing the charming front man whilst you did the actual work. But there's more, Harper, and you need to see this." She pulled out another set of papers. Hotel receipts. Restaurant bills. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany. All on the company card and all dating back 18 months. The Barcelona trip that Richard claimed was for a potential client. Claire's Instagram showed her in Barcelona the same week, cocktails on a rooftop terrace. "The affair has been going on for at least a year and a half," Margaret said quietly. "Possibly longer. He's been using company funds to finance it." I should have felt something. Rage perhaps, or betrayal or hurt. But I felt nothing beyond the numb exhaustion that had settled into my bones. Richard's affair seemed almost irrelevant compared to what he had said about Daniel. Useless. Burden. Good riddance. "What can we do?" I heard myself ask, my voice flat and distant. Margaret's expression shifted into something I recognized from her years in law. Strategic. Calculating. Protective. "Everything legal and entirely devastating," she replied. "You built this company. The patents are in your name. The major contracts came from your designs. Richard has been misusing company funds for personal affairs, which constitutes gross misconduct. And he abandoned you during a family crisis, calling your son." She paused, her jaw tightening. "Calling Daniel what he called him." She leaned forward and took my hands in hers. But I need you with me, Harper. Can you do this? Can you be strong enough to fight back? I looked at Daniel's photograph on the mantelpiece. That smile. That fierce pride he'd always had in my work even when Richard dismissed it. I remembered the unfinished letter I'd found in his room, the one he'd been writing for my birthday. You're the most talented architect I know and the strongest person I've ever met. I hope one day you'll see yourself the way I see you. Through the numbness something stirred. Not rage exactly. Something colder. More deliberate. Yes, I said. Tell me what we need to do. Margaret worked with the speed and precision of someone who had spent 40 years dismantling opposition in courtrooms. Within 48 hours she had coordinated with my solicitor, the company accountant and the bank. I moved through it in a fog, signing documents she explained carefully, each signature feeling like I was signing away my old life and stepping into something unfamiliar and frightening. We were in Margaret's study when we executed the plan. Rain hammered against the windows and the lamp on her desk cast long shadows across the paperwork spread before us. She had made a timeline, color-coded and methodical, showing exactly how Richard had used company resources for his affair whilst I worked 70-hour weeks to keep the firm afloat. First, the company. As majority shareholder in terms of actual contribution and intellectual property, and with the company articles allowing removal of a director for gross misconduct, we convened an emergency board meeting. Margaret sat on the board as a non-executive director, a position she had taken when we first established the firm. She presented the evidence of Richard's misuse of funds with the calm authority of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. The vote was unanimous. Richard was removed as director and his access to company accounts and premises revoked immediately. Second, the joint accounts. Margaret had already helped me document that Richard had abandoned me during a family crisis and was cohabiting with another woman. We froze the joint accounts pending legal separation and cancelled the credit cards Richard held. Every card he had used to wine and dine Claire, to book hotel rooms and buy expensive gifts. All of it stopped. I could barely breathe as I watched my mother methodically dismantle Richard's access to everything. Part of me felt like I was watching someone else's life, some other woman taking revenge on a husband who had destroyed her. But the anger that had kindled at Daniel's funeral kept burning, cold and steady. Is this really happening? I whispered. Margaret looked up from the final document, her expression softening. You're not being vindictive, darling. You're being sensible. He abandoned you when you needed him most. He called your son, your beautiful Daniel, a burden. There are consequences for cruelty. That evening my mobile rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen and my hand shook as I answered. I could hear the panic in his voice before he even finished his first sentence. What the bloody hell have you done? He shouted. My cards aren't working. I'm stranded at the hotel in Marbella and the bill is due. The company accounts are frozen. Harper, this is insane. You can't just. You called our son useless at his own funeral, I said quietly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You said good riddance. Those were your exact words, Richard. I was upset. I didn't mean. You're removed from the company. The house is in my name, purchased with my inheritance from my father. The joint accounts are frozen pending legal separation. You can come home and collect your belongings or you can stay in Marbella with Claire. I genuinely don't care which. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking and my heart hammered against my ribs. Margaret wrapped me in a hug as I broke down, but this time there was something different in my tears. Not just grief but something else. Something that felt almost like strength. Richard rang 14 more times that evening. I didn't answer. Margaret fielded a call from Claire, who was apparently furious that her holiday had been interrupted. My mother's response was ice-cold and brief before she hung up and blocked the number. He'll come back, Margaret said as we sat together later that night. He'll try to negotiate or threaten or manipulate. But we've documented everything. He has no legal ground to stand on. I looked at Daniel's photograph on the side table, the one I carried with me everywhere now. My boy who had believed I was strong even when I couldn't see it myself. Good, I said quietly. Let him try. Richard returned 3 days later, but he didn't come to the house in Islington. Instead he went directly to the office, only to find the locks changed and his security pass deactivated. He rang me incessantly. 17 calls in 2 hours. I didn't answer any of them. Margaret had advised me to let everything go through solicitors now, and I was grateful for the buffer between us. He showed up at Margaret's house late one evening. I was upstairs in the guest room when I heard his voice at the door, loud and demanding. My mother answered with the calm authority of someone who had faced down far more intimidating opponents in court. "You can collect your belongings on Saturday between 10 and 12, she said. Harper's solicitor will be present. Any attempt to contact her outside of legal channels will be documented as harassment. This is my house too." Richard's voice carried up the stairs. "No," Margaret replied coolly. "Check the deeds. The house was purchased with Harper's inheritance from her father and is solely in her name. You've been living there by her grace." Saturday, Richard. 10 o'clock. The door closed. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to silence and feeling something crack inside my chest. Not grief this time, but a strange kind of relief. Margaret came upstairs a moment later and simply sat beside me, her presence solid and reassuring. "I should have done this years ago," I said quietly. "Left him. Daniel used to tell me I deserved better." "Daniel was right," Margaret replied. "He always saw you clearly even when you couldn't see yourself." I had started returning to the office in small increments, unable to bear staying in Margaret's house all day with nothing but my thoughts and grief. The firm felt different without Richard's overbearing presence. Quieter but somehow more alive. My assistant, Priya, had been managing things brilliantly in my absence, keeping projects on schedule and clients reassured. One afternoon as we reviewed blueprints for the South Bank project, Priya hesitated before speaking. "We all knew," she said gently, "that you did the real work. Richard was good at presentations and charming clients, but your designs, they're extraordinary, Harper. Daniel used to come by the office sometimes, did you know? He'd look at your models and drawings and say, 'That's my mum.' He was so proud of you." The tears came before I could stop them. Priya handed me tissues without comment and we sat in my office whilst I cried for what felt like the 100th time that week. But there was something cathartic in it, something healing in knowing that Daniel had seen my worth even when I couldn't. "I should have stood up to Richard years ago," I said when I could speak again. "Maybe Daniel would have seen me be stronger." "Harper," Priya said firmly, "Daniel saw your strength every day. You just couldn't see it yourself. But you're seeing it now." That evening I went to Daniel's room for the first time since the funeral. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Textbooks on the desk. Clothes draped over the chair. The faint scent of his aftershave still lingering in the air. I sat on his bed and held his favorite jumper, the grey one with the university crest, and let myself remember. On his desk I found the letter he'd been writing for my birthday, never finished. The sight of his handwriting, familiar and beloved, nearly broke me. "Mum, you're the most talented architect I know and the strongest person I've ever met. I hope one day you'll see yourself the way I see you. You've built beautiful things your whole life, buildings that will stand for generations, but the most beautiful thing you ever built was..." The sentence ended there. Unfinished. I would never know what he meant to say. But holding that letter, reading his words, I felt something shift inside me. A resolution forming through the grief. I would honor Daniel by becoming the person he believed I was. By standing tall and refusing to be diminished ever again. 6 weeks after Daniel's death I returned fully to work. The office felt transformed without Richard's presence. The team was more relaxed and more creative. I discovered that several junior architects had quietly left over the past 2 years because of Richard's bullying management style. He had taken credit for their ideas, dismissed their contributions and created an atmosphere of anxiety that I had been too buried in my own work to notice. Now with me leading properly, they were flourishing. James, one of our senior architects, pulled me aside one morning with a confession that made my stomach turn. "Richard used to tell us that our ideas weren't good enough," he said. "Then he'd take them to you, present them as his own thoughts and you'd refine them into something brilliant. We knew what he was doing but we were afraid to speak up." I felt sick realizing how complicit I had been in my own diminishment. How I had accepted Richard's version of reality for so long that I couldn't see the truth right in front of me. The South Bank project was approaching its critical phase. The clients, Sarah and Tom, a married couple who ran a sustainable development company, wanted to meet to review the final designs. I was terrified. Richard had always handled client meetings, charming them with expensive lunches and persuasive presentations whilst I stayed in the background. The idea of facing them alone made my hands shake. But Priya and James coached me patiently. "Just be yourself," James said. "Show them what you've shown us. Your passion for creating spaces where people can actually live well, not just exist." The meeting was at a cafe near the development site. I arrived early, clutching my portfolio and fighting the urge to run. Sarah and Tom were warm immediately, shaking my hand and expressing condolences for Daniel's death that felt genuine rather than perfunctory. "We've always admired your firm's work," Sarah said as we settled at a corner table. "But we need to be honest, Harper. Some of Richard's recent ideas felt more focused on prestige than people. We were concerned about the direction." I took a deep breath and opened my portfolio. My hand steadied as I spread out the revised blueprints, designs I had worked on in the early hours when sleep wouldn't come and grief pressed down like a physical weight. "These are my proposals," I said. "Not Richard's. I want to build homes where families can thrive, where children can play safely in green spaces and where elderly residents can live with dignity and independence. Architecture should serve people, not egos." The designs showed housing that was both beautiful and functional. Community gardens and accessible features. Natural light flooding through cleverly angled windows. Spaces designed for connection rather than isolation. I had poured everything into these blueprints, all my grief and anger and determination to create something meaningful from the wreckage of my life. Sarah and Tom studied the plans in silence. I held my breath, prepared for rejection. "This is exactly what we wanted," Tom said finally, looking up with genuine excitement in his eyes. "This is what we hoped for when we first approached your firm. When can you start?" I left the meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the crushing weight of grief or the cold burn of anger, but actual hope that life might have purpose again, that I might build something beautiful from the ruins. That evening I visited Daniel's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone had been installed, simple granite with his name and dates that seemed impossibly brief. 23 years. Not nearly enough. I knelt on the damp grass and told him about the meeting, about the project and about how his words in that unfinished letter had given me courage. "I'm doing this for you," I whispered. "And for me. I'm learning to be the person you always believed I was. I'm building something that matters, something that will help people the way you wanted to help people." The wind rustled through the trees surrounding the cemetery and for just a moment I felt Daniel's presence, not painfully but gently, as if he were standing beside me saying, "I told you so, Mum, I told you that you were strong." I walked away from the grave with my shoulders straighter and my chest lighter. The grief was still there, a permanent weight I would carry forever. But alongside it now was something else. Purpose. Determination. The beginning of healing. 3 months after Daniel's death, I was working late at the office when a man appeared at my door. He was around my age, early 50s perhaps, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an uncertain expression as if he wasn't sure he should be disturbing me. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "I'm Alexander Morrison. I'm the structural engineer contracted for the South Bank project. I wanted to introduce myself properly before we begin working together next week." We shook hands and I felt something unexpected. A spark of genuine human connection that I hadn't felt in years, perhaps decades. His handshake was firm but not aggressive and his smile reached his eyes in a way that Richard's never had. Over the following weeks Alex and I worked closely on the project. He was brilliant, approaching problems with creativity and precision. But what struck me most was how he treated me. He asked my opinion and actually listened to the answers. He treated my ideas with respect, building on them rather than dismissing them. When I suggested modifications to the structural supports to allow for larger windows in the community spaces, he didn't tell me it was impractical. Instead he said, "Let me see how we can make that work because natural light matters." It was such a small thing, but it made my throat tight. Richard had spent 26 years telling me my ideas were too ambitious or too expensive or too complicated. Alex spent his time figuring out how to make them reality. One evening we were working late reviewing stress calculations when Alex made tea for both of us without asking. He simply appeared at my desk with 2 mugs, remembering that I took mine with just a splash of milk. Such a tiny gesture, but it cracked something open inside me. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, seeing my eyes fill with tears. I hadn't planned to tell him. We barely knew each other. But something about his quiet kindness made the words spill out. "My son died 4 months ago," I said. "Car accident." He was 23. And I'm realizing how much of my life I spent being invisible to my own husband. Richard never made tea. Never asked about my day. Never saw me as anything but an extension of his own ambitions. Alex didn't offer platitudes or try to fix anything. He just listened as I talked about Daniel, about Richard's cruelty at the funeral, and about the grief that still ambushed me at unexpected moments. When I finally stopped talking, feeling embarrassed by the outpouring, he was quiet for a moment. "My father died when I was young," he said finally. "Lung cancer." I watched my mother navigate that grief whilst raising 3 children alone. The grief doesn't go away, Harper. But eventually it becomes something you can carry rather than something that carries you. And the people who truly see us, who value us, they become the lifeline that keeps us going. Our eyes met and I felt something shift. Not romance, not yet. But the possibility of it. The recognition that my life wasn't over, that there might be joy again eventually. That I could be seen and valued and appreciated for who I actually was rather than who someone needed me to be. We worked in comfortable silence after that, the kind of easy quiet that usually takes years to develop between people. When we finally packed up to leave, Alex walked me to my car in the darkened car park. Autumn leaves swirled around us and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said as we reached my car. "About Daniel. I'm honored that you felt you could share it." "Thank you for listening," I replied. Really listening, not just waiting for me to stop talking. He smiled, that genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "Same time tomorrow? We've still got those beam calculations to finalize." "Same time tomorrow," I agreed. I drove home to the house in Islington that felt less haunted now that Richard's belongings were gone. Margaret had helped me redecorate Daniel's room, not erasing him but making it a space I could enter without collapsing. His photographs lined the walls and his books filled the shelves. That night I stood in front of those photographs and told Daniel about Alex. About how he made tea without asking and listened without judging and treated my work with respect. "It's not romance, Mum," I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish talking to pictures. "Not yet anyway. But it's nice to feel seen. You'd like him, I think. He's kind." The photographs didn't answer, but I felt something like permission in the silence. Daniel would want me to be happy. He'd want me to find joy again, to build a life that honored his memory without being consumed by his loss. I was learning how to do that. Slowly, painfully, one day at a time. Richard filed for spousal support and claims on the company 6 months after I removed him as director. His solicitor argued that he was entitled to half of everything, that my actions had been vindictive and punitive and that he deserved compensation for years of partnership. The case went to mediation, a grey conference room in central London with uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look ill. I sat across from Richard for the first time since he had collected his belongings. He looked diminished somehow, older than his 52 years. His shirt was rumpled and he had lost weight in a way that didn't suit him. Claire wasn't with him. That fact alone told me volumes. During a break, Richard's solicitor stepped out to make a phone call and we were left alone in the corridor. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. "She left me," Richard said finally, his voice bitter. "Claire. When the money ran out and the cards stopped working. Turns out she wasn't interested in a man with no prospects or company car or expense account for fancy dinners." I felt nothing. Not satisfaction or pity or vindication. Just a vast empty nothing where emotions about Richard used to live. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said, meaning it in the most basic human sense. No one deserved to be used like that, even Richard. "Are you really going to destroy me over this?" he asked, something pleading creeping into his voice. "Harper, we were married for 26 years. That has to count for something." "You called our son useless," I said quietly. "At his funeral. You said good riddance, he was gone. That counts for more, Richard. That counts for everything." He flinched as if I had struck him. I was upset. "I didn't mean." "You meant it," I interrupted. "You always meant it. You resented Daniel because he took my attention away from you. You resented me because I had talent you couldn't claim as your own. You've spent our entire marriage making yourself bigger by making us smaller." The mediator called us back inside before Richard could respond. Margaret sat beside me, her presence solid and reassuring. My solicitor laid out the evidence with calm precision. Richard's abandonment during Daniel's funeral, documented by multiple witnesses including the vicar. His affair with Claire, proven by bank records and hotel receipts. His minimal contribution to the company's actual work, evidenced by patents and contracts bearing my name and signature. My ownership of the house through inheritance from my father. Then Margaret presented something that made Richard go pale. A timeline of his treatment of Daniel throughout our son's life. School events he missed because of golf. University graduation he skipped for a business trip that turned out to be a weekend with Claire. The dismissive comments about Daniel's choice to become a teacher, calling it a waste of potential. He called his own son useless, Margaret said quietly, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. The day of the funeral. While his child was being buried. That is the man seeking sympathy and financial support now. The mediator reviewed everything in silence. The decision was clear and unequivocal. Richard would receive a one-time settlement of £75,000, no claim on the house and no role in the company. He could take his personal possessions and nothing more. Richard's face flushed dark red. "You've ruined me," he hissed at me as we gathered our papers to leave. "I hope you're satisfied." I looked at him calmly, this man I had spent half my life with, and felt only a distant kind of sadness for the years I had wasted. "No, Richard," I said. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped carrying you." Outside the mediation office, Margaret wrapped me in a hug as I broke down. Not from sadness but from release, from the weight of 26 years finally lifting off my shoulders. "It's really over," I whispered against her shoulder. "You're free," she replied simply. That evening Alex texted me. We had been messaging regularly over the past few months, sharing updates about the South Bank project and gradually sharing more personal things. Nothing romantic yet, but a growing friendship that felt precious and rare. "How did it go today?" His message read. I told him everything. About the mediation and Richard's bitterness and the strange empty feeling of watching my marriage officially end. His response came quickly. "You're the strongest person I know. Dinner this weekend? As friends or whatever you're comfortable with." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed my reply. "I'd like that. As friends who might become something more eventually. Slowly." His response made me smile genuinely for the first time that day. "Slowly is perfect. I'll pick you up at 7 on Saturday." 8 months after Daniel's death, the South Bank project broke ground. I stood at the site with my team on a crisp March morning, watching the first foundations being laid. The sky was bright blue and cloudless, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a gift. Alex stood beside me, and when our hands brushed together, his fingers intertwined with mine deliberately and gently. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was quiet and comfortable and real. We had been seeing each other for 2 months, moving slowly as promised. Dinners that turned into long walks along the Thames. Theatre performances followed by hours talking over wine in quiet pubs. He told me about his divorce 5 years prior, about his 2 grown daughters who lived in Edinburgh, and about the loneliness he had carried until it became so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. I told him about Daniel, about the grief that still caught me off guard, and about learning to be the person my son had always believed I was. Alex never tried to fix me or rush me past my sadness. He simply walked beside me, patient and present and kind. The South Bank project progressed beautifully over the following months. My design was being realized exactly as I had envisioned it. Community spaces where neighbors could gather. Sustainable features that would reduce energy costs for families already stretched thin. Accessibility throughout that would allow elderly residents and those with mobility issues to live with dignity and independence. Every decision was made with intention and care. I worked closely with future residents, incorporating their feedback and ensuring the development served their actual needs rather than some architect's ego. One afternoon, a young mother named Keisha approached me at the site. Her son Marcus, a bright-eyed 8-year-old, stood beside her in his wheelchair. "I just wanted to say thank you," Keisha said, her voice thick with emotion. "The accessibility features you've included, the way you've designed the community garden with smooth paths and raised beds, it means Marcus will be able to play with other children safely. You've thought of everything." My eyes filled with tears. "I had a son," I said quietly. "Daniel. He would have loved knowing this project helps families like yours. He wanted to be a teacher because he believed everyone deserved opportunities to thrive." Keisha hugged me and I realized this was Daniel's legacy too. Every building I designed with intention and care was an act of love, a way to honor his memory and the person he believed I could be. My relationship with Alex deepened naturally over those months. We attended his daughter's wedding in Edinburgh, where I met his family and felt welcomed with genuine warmth. He came to Sunday dinners at Margaret's house, fitting seamlessly into conversations about architecture and law and Daniel's favorite books. My mother approved of him, which surprised me with how much it mattered. One evening we were reviewing plans at my house when Alex noticed the photographs of Daniel throughout the rooms. He had seen them before, but this time he paused, really looking. "Tell me about him," he said simply. I talked for hours. About Daniel's laugh that could light up a room. About his fierce defense of anyone being bullied. About his dreams of teaching history because he wanted children to understand how the past shaped the present. About the way he used to ring me every Sunday just to chat about nothing in particular. Alex listened to everything, asking questions and honoring Daniel's memory without trying to minimize my grief or move me past it faster than I was ready. "He sounds extraordinary," Alex said finally. "Like his mother." I kissed him then, gently and tentatively. It was not my first kiss since Richard, but it felt like the first one that mattered, the first one that was about genuine connection rather than obligation or habit. We stood together at the South Bank site one evening in late autumn, watching the building take shape as the sun set over London. The structure was rising from the ground, solid and beautiful and full of promise. "I never thought I'd feel happy again," I admitted, leaning against him. "After Daniel died. The grief is still there, it's always there. But there's joy too now. Hope. A sense that life can be meaningful even after losing everything that mattered." Alex squeezed my hand. "That's not betraying Daniel's memory, Harper. That's honoring it. Living fully and building beautiful things, the way he would want you to." I looked at the building rising against the darkening sky, at this project that embodied everything I believed architecture should be, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of grief, but the ability to carry it alongside joy, to hold both sorrow and hope in the same breath. Daniel would be proud, I thought. And finally, after months of doubt and pain, I was beginning to be proud of myself too. 1 year after Daniel's death, the South Bank project was completed. The opening ceremony took place on a bright September morning with families moving into their new homes, children playing in the community gardens I had designed, and elderly residents admiring the accessible features that would allow them to age with dignity. I stood with Alex and Margaret, watching it all unfold and feeling Daniel's presence not as a painful absence but as a gentle warmth, as if he were watching and smiling. Sarah and Tom publicly credited me as the visionary behind the project, their words generous and genuine. This development exists because Harper Fleming refused to compromise on what truly matters. People, community, and dignity. She has shown us what architecture can be when it is built with love rather than ego. The applause washed over me and I felt tears on my cheeks, but they were not only tears of grief. They were tears of achievement and pride and the recognition that I had built something meaningful from the wreckage of loss. After the ceremony, I drove to Daniel's grave. I had been visiting regularly over the past months, the frequency gradually decreasing not from avoidance but because the grief had shifted. It was no longer the drowning weight that pulled me under. It was a tender ache, a permanent part of my landscape that I had learned to carry. "I did it, darling," I said, kneeling beside the headstone and placing fresh flowers against the granite. "I built something beautiful. The firm is thriving under my leadership. I am thriving. And I have met someone, Alex. He is kind and brilliant, and he honors your memory by loving me well. I think you would like him very much." The wind rustled through the trees and I closed my eyes, breathing in the autumn air and feeling connected to my son across the impossible distance of death. "I am not saying goodbye," I continued. "You are always with me. But I am learning to live again, to be happy again. That is not forgetting you, Daniel. It is carrying you with me into whatever comes next. Everything I build, every decision I make, you are part of it." That evening I hosted a dinner at my house. Margaret was there along with Alex and his daughters visiting from Edinburgh. Priya and James came from the office. Even Keisha brought Marcus, who was thrilled to show everyone photographs of their new flat at Southbank. The house that had felt so empty after Daniel's death was filled with laughter and warmth and the beautiful noise of people who cared about each other. After everyone left, Alex helped me clear up. We moved around the kitchen in comfortable synchronicity, the kind that develops between people who fit together naturally. "I love you," he said quietly, drying the last plate. "I know it is complicated and I do not want to rush anything, but I wanted you to know." I looked at this man who had been patient and kind, who had helped me rebuild not by fixing me but by believing in my strength even when I could not see it myself. "I love you too," I replied, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "It scares me, but I do." We held each other in the kitchen and I realized this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting or replacing but allowing new joy to exist alongside permanent loss. Making space for both grief and happiness, for memory and hope, for endings and beginnings. Later that night I stood alone in my studio, the room where I designed buildings that would stand for generations. On the wall beside my desk hung Daniel's unfinished letter, framed now as a permanent reminder. "You are the most talented architect I know and the strongest person I have ever met. I am finally starting to believe that," I whispered to his photograph beside the letter. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself. I am going to keep building, keep creating and keep living. For both of us." I returned to my sketches, new ideas already forming for the next project. Through the window the lights of London glowed against the night sky, a city full of possibility and life and stories yet to be built. I had lost everything that mattered. My son, my marriage and the illusions I had carried for decades. But from that loss I had built something true. A life of purpose and integrity and love that honored Daniel's memory not by freezing in grief but by moving forward with courage. I was Harper. Architect, mother and survivor. And I was finally, truly home in myself.